What if the Great Pyramid isn't a pristine tomb, but a monument to hidden power? Behind its polished limestone lies a maze of altered records, missing inscriptions, and political edits that rewrite everything we thought we knew. Strange shafts, mismatched tool marks, scrubbed quarry notes, evidence of a structure repeatedly revised, not simply built. The truth is uncomfortable. The Great Pyramid was edited. Tonight we uncover 25 pharaoh secrets buried inside it, patterns of power, concealment, and control. If forbidden archaeology calls to you, subscribe and drop a comment. Where are you watching from, and what time is it? Our descent into the cracks of history begins now. The chamber is suffocatingly narrow, a stone attic pressed beneath 70-ton granite beams. The air tastes of dust and time, thick with the breath of 4 millennia. In the beam-shadowed ceiling, barely visible in the torchlight, a sloppily painted red ochre cartouche spells a single word: Khufu. Egyptologists point to it as the definitive proof that Khufu built the Great Pyramid. Case closed, mystery solved, move along. But even in the dimness, something feels wrong. The official narrative is clean. According to the standard archaeological explanation, these markings were left by quarry crews. Work gangs routinely painted their names and their king's name on blocks before installation. Harmless graffiti, a signature of labor, the kind of authentic detail that makes historians smile and nod knowingly. And yet, the Great Pyramid contains only one such royal cartouche, in one chamber, in one awkward corner. Applied with a shaky hand, in a style that doesn't match the 4th dynasty at all. Think about that for a moment. The most important monument in Egyptian history. Decades of construction, thousands of workers, millions of stone blocks, and only one royal cartouche survives? In a hidden chamber most people will never see? That's not documentation. That's editing. The evidence of revision runs deeper than the paint itself. Researchers analyzing the pigment under magnification discovered something disturbing. The red ochre sits atop a faint older smear, visible in certain lighting angles. This suggests repainted surfaces, not continuous original graffiti. Someone covered something up. Even more troubling, the work gang names listed next to the cartouche include one group called the Friends of Khufu, a name that appears nowhere in contemporaneous records until decades after the pyramid's completion. It's like finding a Beatles autograph signed with a ballpoint pen. The match is off, the style is off, the context is off. This single cartouche appears exactly where later inspectors would have needed proof of the pyramid's royal ownership, but nowhere else. It's tucked away in a chamber so cramped and dangerous that accessing it requires crawling through spaces barely wide enough for a human torso. Why hide proof in a place no one could see? Unless it wasn't proof at all. Picture the scene: a low-ranking official creeping into the difficult chamber decades after the pyramid's completion. He carries a pot of ochre and a brush, hands trembling slightly in the narrow space. He's not carving into stone with the confidence of an original builder. He's painting, quickly, sloppily, trying to imitate an older style while working by flickering torchlight. He glances over his shoulder repeatedly, though no one can follow him into this stone throat. His breathing is shallow. From the confined space, yes, but also from nerves. He's not documenting history. He is rewriting it. The brush strokes are hurried, uneven, nothing like the careful ceremonial inscriptions found in legitimate royal monuments. This isn't the work of a proud craftsman marking his king's achievement. This is the work of someone who needs a story to match a structure. The paint drips slightly. He curses under his breath. A very human moment in a very inhuman place. When he finishes, he doesn't admire his work. He packs his materials and crawls backward through the narrow passage, leaving behind not a record, but a revision. But the deeper question remains. If Khufu's name had to be added to his own pyramid, then whose name was there originally? What inscription was scrubbed away before the red ochre was applied? And why was it so important to erase one identity and insert another? The Great Pyramid wasn't just built with limestone and granite, it was built with lies, layer by careful layer. And the vanishing cartouche, the one piece of evidence historians cling to, may be the biggest lie of all. Because if a pharaoh's identity could be rewritten with a single brushstroke, imagine what could be erased with a chisel. And if you think one suspicious cartouche is troubling, Wait until you see what happened to the quarry records that should have told us exactly who built this monument. Travel east from Giza to the brilliant white limestone quarries of Tura. The morning sun turns the excavated walls into mirrors of polished stone, so bright they hurt to look at directly. This was the source of the gleaming outer casing that once made the Great Pyramid shine like a beacon across the Nile Delta, a divine light visible for miles in every direction. Among these quarry walls, ancient scribes carved their daily work rosters and shipment lists, routine bureaucratic inscriptions documenting which crews delivered stone for which royal projects. Names, dates, quantities, destinations. The kind of meticulous record-keeping that made ancient Egypt function like clockwork. And yet, in several crucial columns carved into the quarry faces, the names are violently scratched out. The official explanation is bureaucratic. Egyptologists often refer to these damaged areas as clerical corrections, weathering, or natural stone degradation. Simple erosion, they say. Wind and sand doing what wind and sand do over thousands of years. But step closer and the explanation crumbles. The damage is not weathering. Erosion doesn't work with surgical precision. These gouges are too concentrated, too deliberate, too obviously intentional. Someone took metal tools to specific sections of text and scraped them into illegibility, leaving the surrounding inscriptions perfectly intact. Microscopic analysis reveals the truth. The chisel patterns in the erasures don't match Old Kingdom tools at all. The angles are wrong. The striking patterns show marks consistent with Middle Kingdom metalwork, tools used centuries after the Great Pyramid was completed. This means someone returned to these quarries long after the original workers were dead, armed with modern equipment and a specific mission, to remove certain names from the historical record. Which names? That's where it gets interesting. The surviving fragments of text surrounding the erasures contain tantalizing clues, partial hieroglyphs that suggest crew names, date references that point to specific months in the later years of what historians assume was Khufu's reign, and geographical markers indicating that these particular shipments went to the horizon of Khufu, the pyramid itself. But the actual crew names, the foreman's titles, the specific teams responsible for those shipments, scraped away with the thoroughness of a state censorship operation. Why would anyone care about erasing the names of stoneworkers? Dead men can't threaten anyone. Unless the names revealed something inconvenient about who was actually in power when those stones were cut. Picture the scene at Tura in the years following the pyramid's completion. Workers still carve their daily logs into the quarry walls. It's tradition, routine, pride, and workmanship. Then one day, a different kind of visitor arrives. Not a work crew, a small group of officials with newer tools and very specific instructions. They examine the walls methodically, reading the carved logs like intelligence reports. When they find certain entries, they nod grimly and begin their work. The metal scrapes against stone. Sparks fly. Names that once meant something to someone are reduced to meaningless scratches. A foreman approaches, confused. "What are you doing? Those are work records." The official doesn't look up from his chiseling. "These names were never here. But you remember incorrectly." The foreman watches as decades of documentation disappear under the rhythmic scraping of bronze against limestone. He knows better than to argue with men who carry royal seals, but he also knows what he's seeing isn't correction. It's elimination. The erasures at Tura aren't random. They cluster around specific time periods, specific work gangs, specific projects, almost as if someone was following a list, systematically removing evidence of who was really in charge during the pyramid's construction. And here's what makes it even more suspicious. The same pattern of erasure appears at quarry sites across Egypt. Aswan, where the granite came from. Mokattam, where they cut foundation stones. Hatnub, where they quarried the calcite for the burial chamber. At every single quarry that supplied materials for the Great Pyramid, names have been deliberately scraped away. That's not maintenance. That's not weathering. That's a coordinated campaign to rewrite history at the source. The Great Pyramid wasn't just edited in its chambers and passages. Its entire supply chain was retroactively censored, worker by worker, name by name, until the only story left was the one someone wanted future generations to believe. But if the workers could be erased from history, what about the man who supposedly designed the entire project? In the Western Cemetery at Giza stands a mastaba tomb marked G7000X. Inside, limestone reliefs show a broad-shouldered man with a confident gaze, draped in the high-ranking official's robe. His titles, carved deep into the stone, are impressive. Overseer of Quarries, Chief Architect, Vizier to His Majesty. His name is Hemiunu, and according to every textbook, he designed the Great Pyramid. There's only one problem. His tomb tells a very different story. Hemiunu appears in early 4th Dynasty records as a royal relative, the nephew of Khufu, a man of respectable rank but unremarkable influence. His initial tomb inscriptions list him as a court official, nothing more. Competent, loyal, forgettable. Then something changes. Modern scribal analysis reveals that some of Hemiunu's most prestigious titles, including Chief Architect of the Horizon, were carved significantly deeper than others. The deeper inscriptions cut through pre-existing patina and weathering patterns, clear evidence that they were added during a later recarving event. The original version of his tomb didn't call him the pyramid's architect. Those titles came later, chiseled over earlier, humbler inscriptions. But why promote a dead man? Because the real architect needed to disappear. Multiple archaeologists have documented extensive alterations to Hemiunu's mastaba. Stone blocks were replaced with higher quality limestone. Certain wall reliefs were plastered over and recarved. Some of his titles appear twice, with subtle stylistic differences that suggest different scribes working in different decades. It's as if someone revisited his tomb with instructions to upgrade his importance, to make him grander in death than he ever was in life. But the most telling detail is what's missing from his tomb. Any technical knowledge of pyramid construction, no architectural plans, no engineering innovations, no tools or models, no inscriptions describing his design process or mathematical calculations. For the supposed architect of humanity's most complex ancient structure, Hemiunu's tomb is remarkably light on technical details. Compare this to the tomb of Seneb, a much lower-ranking official who oversaw pyramid construction crews. His mastaba contains detailed reliefs showing construction techniques, worker organization, and engineering solutions. It reads like a technical manual. Hemiunu's tomb reads like a resume written by someone else. So, who was the real architect? Historical records from later dynasties contain tantalizing hints. A fragmentary papyrus from the Middle Kingdom mentions the master of the great work, whose name was removed for his transgressions against the throne. A damaged inscription at Saqqara refers to he who designed the eternal house, but was cast down for his ambitions. These aren't references to Hemiunu. They point to someone else, someone whose name was deliberately erased from the record. The process of historical editing becomes clearer when you examine other high-ranking officials from Khufu's reign. Several show the same pattern. Modest initial inscriptions retroactively enhanced with grander titles. Tombs improved after their occupants were safely dead and unable to contradict the new narrative. Picture the scene at Giza several decades after Hemiunu's death. A team of stonemasons arrives at his mastaba with specific instructions. They bring fresh limestone, new chisels, and carefully prepared texts. The work is methodical. Original inscriptions are carved away. New ones take their place. Humble titles become grand ones. A court official becomes a chief architect. The foreman reads from a papyrus scroll, Hemiunu, beloved of Khufu, overseer of the king's works, architect of the eternal horizon. One of the workers pauses. But the old inscription said he was just... The old inscription was incomplete, the foreman interrupts. This is the correct record. The worker nods and continues carving. He's learned not to ask questions about inconsistencies. The royal administration has been correcting many records lately. Names appearing and disappearing. Titles shifting like sand in the wind. History, it seems, is more fluid than most people realize. When the work is finished, Hemiunu's tomb tells a new story. He's no longer a minor court official who happened to be related to the king. He's now the brilliant architect who conceived and executed the greatest monument of the ancient world. The only problem? He probably had nothing to do with designing it. The real architect, whoever he was edited out so thoroughly that we don't even know his name. His innovations became Hemiunu's legacy. His genius became someone else's claim to eternal fame. And if they could erase the pyramid's architect from history, imagine what they did to the chamber that was supposed to honor the king himself. Walk into the king's chamber and you confront something impossible, a room that should tell us everything, but instead tells us nothing. The chamber is carved entirely from red Aswan granite, stone so hard that copper chisels barely scratch it. Every surface gleams with mathematical precision. The walls rise to exact proportions. The ceiling rests on granite beams cut to tolerances that would challenge modern machinery. This should be the pyramid's voice, the place where hieroglyphic inscriptions announce Khufu's divine kingship for eternity, where star maps guide his soul to the heavens, where protective formulas shield his mummy from harm. Instead, silence. Not a single hieroglyph, not one carved symbol, not even a simple inscription identifying the chamber's purpose. The official explanation is embarrassingly weak. The chamber was unfinished. Construction schedules forced workers to abandon decorative plans in favor of completing the structural work. But granite doesn't lie, and the evidence carved into its surface reveals a very different story. Close inspection of the walls reveals faint, straight chisel preparation lines, the kind ancient artisans carved before beginning full hieroglyphic inscriptions. These lines are unmistakable. They frame rectangular zones where text was meant to appear, panels carefully measured and marked for carved inscriptions. But the hieroglyphs were never carved. The guidelines remain like ghostly intentions, forever frozen at the moment work stopped. Why would the most important chamber in Egypt's most monumental structure begin inscriptions and then halt? The patterns are too deliberate to be accidental. These aren't random scratches or unfinished rough work. These are professional preparation marks made by skilled artisans who knew exactly what they were doing. Picture the scene, master carvers kneeling in torchlight, their tools glinting as they strike precise guidelines into the granite. They work with the confidence of men who have done this hundreds of times before. Rectangle by rectangle, they frame the chamber for sacred texts. Their overseer stands behind them, nodding approval. Everything proceeds according to plan. The chamber will soon speak with the voice of divine kingship, proclaiming Khufu's eternal rule over the living and the dead. Then a messenger arrives. He carries a papyrus scroll sealed with royal wax. The overseer reads it, his face darkening. He whispers to the craftsmen. Tools stop moving. Conversations fall silent. "Gather your equipment," the overseer says quietly. "Our work here is finished." One of the carvers gestures at the half-prepared walls. But the inscriptions? There will be no inscriptions. The king's name? The king requires silence. The craftsmen exchange glances but obey. They've learned not to question sudden changes in royal projects. Orders come from high places they cannot see, driven by politics they are not meant to understand. They pack their copper, chisels, and polishing stones. One by one, they file out of the granite chamber, leaving behind only the ghostly grid of preparation marks and the echo of abandoned intentions. The chamber's voice was silenced before it could speak, but the granite tells us even more. The sarcophagus, that massive rectangular box tourists assume held Khufu's mummy, shows no evidence of ever containing a body. No resin residue from mummification, no linen fragments, no bitumen marks, no lid fragments anywhere in the chamber, no signs of forced entry. This isn't a tomb that was robbed. This is a tomb that was never used. The sarcophagus itself poses additional mysteries. Unlike every other confirmed royal sarcophagus from the Old Kingdom, it bears no inscriptions, no titles, no names, no protective spells. It's a blank slate, as anonymous as the chamber that contains it. Even stranger, the sarcophagus is slightly wider than the ascending passage. It couldn't have been brought into the chamber after construction. It had to be installed during building, built into the chamber like a permanent fixture. That suggests long-term planning. This chamber was always intended to contain that sarcophagus, but someone changed their mind about what, or who, it should contain. Modern archaeologists have found other royal tombs from the same period. All contain inscriptions. All show evidence of burial. All identify their occupants clearly and repeatedly. The king's chamber in the Great Pyramid is unique in its silence. Someone ordered the inscriptions stopped. Someone required that this chamber remain anonymous. Someone needed the most important burial space in ancient Egypt to carry no voice, no identity, no story. The question isn't why the chamber is empty. The question is why someone worked so hard to keep it that way. And if the chamber's walls were silenced, what about the written documents that should have recorded how this monument was built? In 2013, archaeologists excavating the ancient Red Sea port of Wadi al-Jarf uncovered what should have been the archaeological find of the century, the oldest known Egyptian papyri, dating directly to Khufu's reign, written by Merer, an overseer of transport crews. They documented daily shipments of limestone from Tura quarries to the pyramid construction site at Giza. It should have been the smoking gun, the final proof of how the pyramid was built, told in the words of the men who actually built it. Instead, it raised more questions than it answered. The papyri arrive in fragments, written in confident hieratic script across multiple scrolls. Merer's handwriting is steady and methodical, the work of the experienced administrator who recorded every detail of his operations: boat crews, stone quantities, travel times, weather conditions. The bureaucratic backbone of pyramid construction, preserved in ink and reed fiber. But the documents are damaged in conspicuously concentrated ways, not torn by age, not deteriorated by water or insects. Cleanly removed. Entire vertical columns are missing from the papyri, excised with cuts so precise they could only have been made deliberately. Papyrus deteriorates randomly and irregularly over time. These cuts are surgical. The missing sections follow a clear pattern. They correspond to crew assignments during politically unstable months, late in Khufu's reign, daily logs describing periods when work teams waited for new instruction, references to a location called Akhet Khufu East Chamber, a designation found nowhere else in Egyptian records, entries mentioning officials whose names were later erased from other monuments. Merer's diary reads smoothly for weeks at a time, then abruptly breaks into gaps where text has been removed, then resumes as if nothing happened. The pattern is too systematic to be accidental damage. Someone went through these papyri column by column, removing specific information while leaving the rest intact. But here's what makes it even more sinister. The cuts were made using metal tools from a later period. Microscopic analysis of the cut edges reveals scoring patterns consistent with Middle Kingdom knives, blades manufactured centuries after Merer wrote his logs. This means someone returned to these documents long after they were written, opened the ancient scrolls, and systematically removed information that had become inconvenient to later rulers. Picture the scene. A Middle Kingdom scribe sits in a treasury archive, surrounded by baskets of old papyri. He works by oil lamp, carefully unrolling each scroll to examine its contents. When he finds entries that match his list of prohibited information, he takes out a sharp bronze knife. The cuts are precise, clinical. He's done this before. One scroll contains Merer's account of a delay in stone delivery. The crew waited 3 days for new orders from the palace regarding the eastern works. The scribe reads this entry, checks his list, and makes a clean vertical cut. The column of text falls away, leaving a gap in the record. Another scroll mentions a meeting between Merer and Ankhaf, overseer of the pyramid works. But historical records show that Ankhaf fell from favor late in Khufu's reign. His name appears on the scribe's deletion list. Another cut, another gap. Column by column, the political inconveniences disappear. What remains is a sanitized version of pyramid construction, efficient, orderly, uncomplicated by the power struggles and personnel changes that actually occurred. When the scribe finishes, he rolls up the edited papyri and returns them to storage. Future historians will find a record of pyramid construction, but only the parts someone wanted them to see. The most troubling deletions involve references to workforce changes. Merer's surviving entries describe his regular crew of 40 men, led by specific foremen with specific names. But several times, the papyrus shows evidence of entries being removed just before references to new crew assignments or replacement workers from Memphis. These gaps suggest that significant personnel changes occurred during pyramid construction, changes someone later decided were too sensitive to preserve in the historical record. Why would crew changes matter to later pharaohs? Unless those changes reflected political purges, factional struggles, or shifts in power that contradicted the official narrative of Khufu's stable reign. The papyri were meant to be routine administrative records, ship manifests, and delivery logs. The kind of mundane documentation that survives precisely because it's too boring for anyone to bother editing. Except, someone did bother. Someone cared enough about these logistics records to hunt down ancient scrolls and surgically remove specific information. The earliest known document about pyramid construction was censored by people who didn't want future generations to read all of it. And with that pattern established, erased names, missing architects, silent chambers, censored records, we move deeper into the pyramid structure. Because these first 5 secrets are just the surface layer, the real mysteries lie buried in the stone itself. The Queen's Chamber sits in a strange liminal space inside the Great Pyramid, too large to ignore, too plain to explain. For centuries it was dismissed as a symbolic chamber, a placeholder, an architectural afterthought. But in 1872, British engineer Wayneman Dixon made a discovery that shattered that comfortable explanation. Hidden behind the chamber's smooth walls were 2 narrow shafts, angled upward, extending deep into the pyramid's stone mass. At first, explorers called them air shafts, a label that made no sense for a chamber that was permanently sealed. But as exploration technology advanced, the shafts revealed something far more mysterious than ventilation. They were never meant to be opened. The shafts themselves are marvels of precision engineering. Barely 8 inches square, they maintain perfect angles as they climb through hundreds of tons of limestone. But at their ends, instead of openings to the outside, archaeologists found something unprecedented. Limestone doors, fitted with tiny copper pins arranged like handles. These weren't blockages or construction debris. They were deliberate seals, installed with the same precision as every other element of the pyramid's architecture. When high-resolution camera probes were sent through the shafts in 1993 and again in 2002, they revealed details that should have been impossible. The limestone doors showed tool marks consistent with smoothing after installation. The copper pins were shaped like miniature handles or locking mechanisms. Behind one door lay evidence of a second chamber, sealed as carefully as the first. Someone had built these shafts to carry something to their destinations, then locked them permanently. The astronomical alignments only deepen the mystery. The northern shaft points precisely toward the circumpolar stars, the imperishables in Egyptian cosmology. The southern shaft aligns with Orion's belt, associated with Osiris, god of the underworld and resurrection. But if these were symbolic passages for the king's soul to reach the stars, why seal them with such elaborate security? Souls don't need copper locks. The ancient Egyptians believed certain rituals required physical objects to travel these celestial pathways. Sacred amulets, written spells, offerings to the gods. The shafts may have been built to deliver such objects directly to their stellar destinations, following the precise astronomical alignments. Picture the ritual. Priests carrying small sacred objects up through the pyramid's passages to the Queen's Chamber. By flickering torchlight, they place the offerings into the narrow shafts. The objects slide down the angled passages until they reach the sealed chambers at the ends. Then, the copper doors are closed, the pins are turned, the pathways to the gods are sealed forever. This wasn't communication with the divine, it was one-way delivery. But what were they delivering? And why was it so important that these messages never be retrieved? The shaft's construction required extraordinary planning. Workers had to carve the passages while building the pyramid around them, maintaining perfect angles through multiple courses of stone. The sealed chambers had to be shaped and finished before being permanently locked away. This level of effort suggests the shafts weren't symbolic decorations. They served a specific crucial function in the pyramid's original purpose. Modern attempts to open the doors have been carefully limited. In 2002, a robot drill created a small hole in the first door, revealing the chamber beyond. But instead of answers, explorers found more questions: rough stone walls, scattered debris, and evidence of another sealed door deeper in the passage. The pyramid was protecting something, layer by layer, door by door. Egyptian religious texts from later periods describe rituals involving sealed messages to the imperishable ones, and offerings placed beyond the reach of the profane. These may be references to exactly the kind of sealed delivery system found in the Queen's Chamber shafts. But if later pharaohs understood these rituals, why don't we? What knowledge was deliberately lost between the 4th dynasty and the textual records that survive from later periods? The answer may lie in the shafts themselves. When the pyramid's purpose was edited by later rulers, these sealed passages became inconvenient reminders of the original function, too integrated into the architecture to remove, too mysterious to explain. So they were left sealed and forgotten, hidden behind smooth chamber walls until Victorian engineers rediscovered them by accident. The shafts represent something unprecedented in Egyptian architecture, passages built specifically to remain closed, messages sent to destinations no living person could reach, communications sealed for eternity. They suggest the Great Pyramid wasn't just a tomb or a symbol, it was an active ritual machine designed to perform specific functions that we're only beginning to understand. And if the pyramid's builders went to such lengths to seal their star messages, imagine what they did to hide the chambers that were never meant to be found at all. Step into the Grand Gallery, and you enter a space that defies every convention of ancient Egyptian architecture. The corridor stretches upward like a stone cathedral, its walls rising in 7 corbelled steps, each level slightly overhanging the one below. The geometry is breathtaking. It is also utterly bizarre. At 153 feet long and 28 feet high, the Grand Gallery dwarfs every other passage in the pyramid. Its scale suggests supreme importance, the architectural centerpiece of the entire monument. But its design makes no structural sense. The official explanation has always been functional. This was a giant ramp used to haul massive granite blocks up to the king's chamber. Workers supposedly dragged 3-ton sarcophagi and ceiling beams up this steep inclined passage. But the engineering tells a different story. The slope is 26 degrees, too steep for safely moving heavy loads with ancient technology. Sledges would slide backward, ropes would snap under the awkward angles. Workers would be crushed by rolling stones. Even more problematic, the polished limestone surfaces would create deadly slipping hazards. The gallery's walls are finished to the same mirror-smooth standard as the finest temple interiors. No functional ramp would waste time on such decorative perfection. Then there are the corbels themselves, the stepped overhangs that define the gallery's distinctive profile. From an engineering standpoint, these overhangs weaken the structure rather than strengthen it. Each corbel creates a stress concentration point where the ceiling could potentially fail. If this was simply a ramp, why build in structural vulnerabilities? The answer becomes clear when you examine the gallery's acoustic properties. The corbelled walls create a unique resonance chamber that amplifies and focuses sound waves. Speak in a normal voice at the bottom of the gallery, and your words echo with cathedral-like intensity at the top. This wasn't designed for hauling stones. It was designed for ceremony. The gallery's proportions match those found in temple sanctuaries across Egypt, spaces specifically engineered for ritual chanting and religious procession. The 28-foot height aligns with acoustic principles that maximize vocal resonance. Along the gallery's walls run a series of rectangular niches, spaced at precise intervals. Egyptologists have never adequately explained their purpose, but their positioning suggests they once held torches, incense braziers, or ritual objects that would illuminate and sanctify processions up the gallery's length. Picture the scene: priests in white linen robes climbing slowly up the gallery, their chants amplifying off the corbelled walls. Incense smoke rises toward the distant ceiling. Torchlight flickers from the wall niches, casting shifting shadows on the polished limestone. At the top of the gallery waits the pharaoh, or perhaps his representative, ready to participate in whatever ceremony this remarkable space was. Designed to accommodate. But what ceremony? And why was it so important that it required the largest interior space in the pyramid? Later, Egyptian texts describe coronation rituals that involve symbolic ascension, the pharaoh climbing from the earthly realm to divine kingship. Some scholars believe the Grand Gallery may have served this function, with the ascending procession representing the ruler's transformation from mortal to god. The gallery's astronomical alignment supports this theory. Like the rest of the pyramid, it's oriented to cardinal directions with extraordinary precision. At specific times of year, celestial light would have penetrated the pyramid's passages and illuminated the gallery in ways that enhanced its ritual significance. But here's where the story gets darker. There's no record of these ceremonies in surviving Egyptian texts, no descriptions of processions up the Grand Gallery, no accounts of the rituals it was designed to accommodate. The ceremonies were erased along with everything else. When later pharaohs edited the pyramid's purpose, they couldn't alter its architecture. The Grand Gallery was too massive, too integral to the structure, but they could erase the knowledge of how it was used. The result is a space of overwhelming grandeur with no documented function, a masterpiece of acoustic engineering with no recorded ceremonies, a ritual chamber whose rituals were deliberately forgotten. Modern visitors climb the gallery's steep slope, marveling at its construction, while guides offer vague explanations about moving stones. Few realize they're walking through the remains of a religious theater, a space where pharaohs once performed ceremonies so powerful that later rulers found it necessary to erase them from history. The Grand Gallery stands as perhaps the most sophisticated interior space built in the ancient world, but it also represents something more troubling, the ability of political power to not just silence voices, but to make entire ritual traditions disappear. And above this ceremonial space, hidden behind layers of granite, lie even stranger secrets, chambers that were sealed not just from the public, but from the pharaohs who supposedly built them. Above the king's chamber, hidden from tourist eyes, lie 5 so-called relieving chambers, empty stone rooms stacked like boxes, each capped by massive granite beams, designed to distribute the pyramid's enormous weight. Some of these beams carry a secret that has puzzled engineers for over 2 centuries. They're cracked clean through. Not hairline fractures that developed over time, but complete breaks that split the beams from top to bottom. In some cases, you can see daylight through the gaps. The standard explanation sounds reasonable: thermal stress. Granite expands and contracts with temperature changes. Over 4,500 years, the explanation goes, these natural cycles created stress fractures in the stone. There's just one problem with this theory. The cracks show clear evidence of pre-existing fractures. When Victorian explorers first discovered these chambers in the 1830s, they documented something extraordinary. The granite beams showed polishing marks and chisel scars that overlapped the fracture lines. This means the ancient builders worked around existing cracks, smoothing and finishing stones they knew were already broken. They deliberately installed damaged beams in the most structurally critical part of the pyramid. Modern geological analysis confirms what the Victorian explorers suspected. The fractures follow natural fault lines in the granite, weaknesses that would have been visible when the stone was cut at Aswan quarries, 600 miles south of Giza. No ancient foreman would have accepted cracked beams for normal construction. Egyptian quarry workers were legendary for their quality control. They rejected flawed stones for far less important projects. Yet here, in the Great Pyramid, the most important monument in Egyptian history, they used beams they knew were compromised. Why? Because the beams weren't really load-bearing. Engineering analysis reveals something remarkable about these relieving chambers. They don't actually relieve structural stress. The pyramid's internal architecture is so well designed that the chambers above the king's chamber carry virtually no weight. The real structural support comes from the solid stone masonry surrounding them. The cracked beams were window dressing, installed to create the appearance of massive structural engineering while serving an entirely different function. They were hiding something above them. Recent muon scans and ground-penetrating radar have revealed what the ancient builders were concealing: additional voids and chambers in the pyramid's upper reaches, spaces that would only be detectable with modern technology. The granite beams weren't supporting the pyramid's weight. They were blocking access to areas the builders wanted to keep permanently hidden. Picture the construction process. Workers installing massive granite beams they knew were cracked. The foreman questions the decision, but his orders are explicit. These particular beams must be used, fractures and all. The workers struggle to position stones that should have been rejected at the quarry. The beams are so heavy that moving them requires elaborate ramps and lever systems. Installing damaged stones takes the same effort as installing perfect ones. But the cracks don't matter because load-bearing was never the point. Above the fractured beams, other teams seal chambers that will remain hidden for millennia. Whatever they're concealing is considered too sensitive for even future pharaohs to discover. The irony is perfect. The relieving chambers that supposedly protected the king's chamber were actually designed to protect something else entirely. Something hidden in the pyramid's upper levels that we're only now beginning to detect. The ancient builders faced a dilemma. They needed to create the impression of solid engineering while concealing critical evidence of the pyramid's true purpose. Their solution was ingenious: install obviously flawed beams that would draw attention to the chambers everyone could see, while hiding the chambers that really mattered. For over a century, archaeologists focused on the dramatic cracks in the visible beams while missing the concealed spaces above them. The builders' misdirection worked perfectly, but modern scanning technology has finally pierced their deception. The muon scans reveal geometric anomalies in precisely the areas above the cracked beams, spaces too regular to be natural voids, too carefully concealed to be accidents. The granite beams that seem like the pyramid's greatest structural weakness may actually be markers pointing toward its greatest secret. Those cracks weren't failures of engineering. They were breadcrumbs left by builders who knew their concealed chambers might someday need to be found by people with technology advanced enough to see through stone. The question is no longer why the beams are cracked. The question is what lies hidden above them, sealed away behind layers of stone and centuries of misdirection. And if they went to such lengths to hide chambers above the king's chamber, what did they bury below it? In 2017, scanning technology revealed something that shouldn't exist: a massive rectangular void directly beneath the Great Pyramid's original entrance. The cavity measures roughly 100 feet long, 25 feet wide, and 15 feet high, large enough to house a small temple. It's too regular to be a natural formation, too precisely positioned to be a construction accident, and too well hidden to be anything but intentional. The void sits exactly where ancient Egyptian architectural principles would place the most important administrative space in a royal complex, the document archive. Every major Egyptian monument had such a room, a carefully designed chamber, where scribes stored construction plans, religious texts, economic records, and royal decrees. These archives were the institutional memory of Egyptian civilization, preserving the knowledge needed to maintain complex royal projects across centuries. For the Great Pyramid, the most ambitious construction project in human history, such an archive would have been essential. Yet no trace of pyramid construction documents has ever been found. Until now. The void's dimensions match perfectly with known archive chambers from other royal complexes. Its location beneath the main entrance follows standard Egyptian practice for protecting important documents while maintaining controlled access. Microgravity surveys and muon tomography have mapped the space in remarkable detail. The void has a flat ceiling, uniform walls, and a floor aligned precisely with the pyramid's geometric center. This wasn't carved randomly. It was designed by master architects. Most telling, the chamber shows clear signs of having been sealed after construction. There's no passage connecting it to the pyramid's known interior, no shaft or corridor that would allow access from above or below. Someone built this archive, filled it with whatever they wanted to preserve, and then sealed it permanently from the inside. But why seal an archive? Document chambers were meant to be accessed, referenced, updated. Sealing one permanently suggests the contents were too dangerous to leave accessible, but too important to destroy. The answer may lie in the timing of the seal. Egyptian records from the Middle Kingdom, centuries after the pyramid's construction, contain references to documents of the ancestors, sealed in the house of the horizon. Some scholars believe this phrase refers specifically to hidden chambers within pyramids. These texts describe knowledge that was too pure for corrupted ages, and had to be preserved beyond the reach of lesser kings. Picture the scene: scribes working by torchlight in the chamber beneath the pyramid's entrance. Around them, reed baskets overflow with papyrus scrolls, the complete administrative record of pyramid construction, names of the real architects, accounts of political struggles, records of the original purpose. They know this knowledge will be dangerous in the wrong hands. Future pharaohs might use it to legitimize their own power or expose the deceptions built into the monument above them. The chief scribe reads the royal order one final time: seal the chamber of writings. Let the truth sleep until the proper time. Workers begin installing the final stones that will close the archive forever. The scribes gather their lamps and tools, taking one last look at centuries of accumulated knowledge. The final block slides into place. The chamber disappears from human access, becoming invisible, undetectable, except to future technology that can peer through solid stone. Modern attempts to access the void have been carefully limited. The Egyptian authorities, protective of the monument's integrity, have restricted invasive exploration. But non-destructive scanning continues to reveal new details about the hidden chamber. Recent surveys suggest the void contains structured spaces, Not just an empty cavity, but organized storage areas that could have held thousands of documents. The floor shows geometric patterns that may indicate furniture or storage systems. Most intriguingly, the scans detect what appear to be discrete objects within the void. Rectangular shapes consistent with document containers, smaller items that could be scroll cases or writing implements. The archive may still contain its original contents, preserved in the dry conditions that have protected organic materials throughout Egypt for millennia. If the void is ever safely accessed, it could revolutionize our understanding of pyramid construction. The documents inside might reveal the true identity of the pyramid's architect. They could expose the political struggles that led to so many altered records. They might even explain the pyramid's original purpose. But accessing the chamber poses enormous risks. Any breach could introduce moisture, bacteria, or contamination that would destroy papyrus documents after 4,500 years of perfect preservation. The archive beneath the entrance represents the ultimate archaeological dilemma, the most potentially valuable discovery in Egyptian history, locked away behind the need to preserve what we hope to find. The pyramid's builders succeeded in creating the perfect time capsule. The question is whether we're worthy of opening it. The Queen's Chamber occupies the exact center of the Great Pyramid, positioned with mathematical precision on both the north-south and east-west axes. In Egyptian religious architecture, such a central location carried supreme significance, the Sacred Heart, where the monument's spiritual power concentrated. Every comparable chamber from the Old Kingdom contains elaborate decorations, star ceilings mapping the pharaoh's celestial journey, protective formulas carved into walls, images of gods welcoming the deceased ruler into eternity. The Queen's Chamber contains none of this. Not a single carved hieroglyph, not one painted symbol, not even a simple inscription identifying the chamber's purpose or dedicating it to a deity. The silence is deafening. Official explanations call the chamber unfinished, abandoned when builders shifted focus to the higher king's chamber. This theory crumbles under examination of the physical evidence. The chamber walls show clear traces of careful preparation for decoration. Faint chisel preparation lines outline rectangular panels where hieroglyphic inscriptions were meant to appear. These guidelines required skilled artisans working to precise measurements. But the inscriptions planned for these panels were never carved. Even more revealing, some areas show evidence of smoothing work done after the initial guideline carving. This suggests that artisans began preparing surfaces for decoration, stopped mid-process, and then attempted to erase evidence of their preparation. Someone ordered this chamber's voice to be permanently silenced. The chamber's eastern wall contains a tall, narrow niche that precisely matches offering alcoves found in temple sanctuaries throughout Egypt. These recesses housed statues of gods or sacred objects that received daily rituals. But this niche stands empty. Not robbed, empty by design. The architectural sophistication makes the absence even more mysterious. The chamber's proportions follow sacred geometric ratios, found in the most important religious spaces. Its ventilation system connects to the sealed star shafts, suggesting it was meant for active ritual use, not abandonment. This was designed as a god's chamber. Then, the god was banished. Traces of ancient plaster suggest the walls may once have carried painted decorations rather than carved ones. Plaster fragments found in debris contain traces of pigment consistent with religious artwork from the 4th dynasty. But if the chamber was once decorated, those decorations were deliberately removed. Scrape marks in the remaining plaster show systematic removal rather than natural deterioration. Picture the scene: artisans standing in the chamber with their tools and pigments, ready to transform blank walls into a sacred space. The master painter has planned elaborate scenes showing the pharaoh's divine rebirth. Sketches cover wooden tablets leaning against the walls. Then orders arrive from the palace. A messenger carries a papyrus scroll sealed with royal wax. The painter reads it, his face growing pale. "Put away your brushes," he tells his assistants. "There will be no paintings here." But the chamber requires its sacred images. The chamber requires silence. The workers exchange confused glances, but obey. They've seen enough political purges to know when not to ask questions. They pack their pigments and brushes, roll up their sketches, and file out of the chamber. Behind them, They leave a space prepared for divinity, but condemned to emptiness. Later analysis of the chamber's acoustic properties reveals it was designed for vocal rituals. The walls and ceiling create specific resonances that would amplify chanted prayers or sacred formulas. Combined with the offering niche and star shaft connections, this suggests the chamber was meant for regular religious ceremonies. But ceremonies honoring which god? And why did that god become so dangerous that even depicting them became forbidden? Egyptian religious texts from later dynasties contain oblique references to the god whose name was removed and the hidden one whose worship was forbidden. These may refer to deities whose cults were officially suppressed during political upheavals. If the queen's chamber was originally dedicated to such a god, its silencing makes perfect sense. Rather than destroy the chamber, which would be architecturally impossible, later rulers simply erased its religious identity. The empty niche serves as a monument to absence, a god-shaped hole in the pyramid's heart. Modern visitors often comment on the chamber's unsettling atmosphere. Unlike other pyramid spaces that feel ancient but neutral, the queen's chamber carries a weight of suppression. The silence isn't peaceful, it's enforced. The chamber was built to speak, but commanded to remain mute. Built to house divinity, but forced to harbor emptiness. And if the pyramid's builders were willing to silence a god, imagine what they did to hide the passages that were never meant to be found by anyone, living or dead. The descending passage plunges into the pyramid's foundation, like a stone throat swallowing visitors into the earth. At 26.5 degrees, it's steep enough to require handholds, claustrophobic enough to trigger panic. Most tourists who brave the descent emerge grateful to see daylight again. But they've just walked through one of the pyramid's most elaborate deceptions. The passage presents itself as a journey into the underworld, the pharaoh's symbolic descent into the realm of death before resurrection. Tour guides recite this interpretation with confidence, pointing to the rough-cut chamber at the passage's end as evidence of the underworld's chaotic nature. There's just one problem. The passage doesn't point toward death at all. It points toward eternal life. The descending passage aligns with extraordinary precision to the circumpolar stars, the imperishables in ancient Egyptian cosmology. These stars never set below the horizon, making them symbols of eternal existence and divine kingship. When the pyramid was built, the passage pointed directly at Thuban, the pole star of that era, which the Egyptians associated with unchanging royal authority. This wasn't a path to the underworld, it was a pathway to immortality. But if the passage was designed to celebrate eternal kingship, why does it end in such a crude, unfinished chamber? Because the chamber was deliberately damaged later. Archaeological analysis reveals that the so-called subterranean chamber shows two distinct phases of construction. The initial work involved careful planning, precise measurements, and skilled stoneworking. Tool marks from this period show the confidence of master craftsmen. Then something changed. Later, tool marks are different. Rougher, hurried, almost violent. Someone attacked the chamber with chisels, destroying smooth surfaces, and creating the chaotic appearance that tourists see today. Remnants of plaster found in cracks suggest the chamber was once finished and decorated. Chemical analysis of these fragments reveals traces of pigments consistent with royal decoration from the 4th dynasty. The chamber was completed, decorated, and then systematically vandalized. But the most telling evidence comes from the passage walls themselves. Hidden beneath centuries of dust and tourist traffic, researchers have found traces of the original surface treatment, polished limestone, that once made the passage gleam like a mirror. This wasn't a rough tunnel carved for symbolic purposes. It was finished to the same standard as the finest temple corridors, designed to create an experience of ascending toward divine light. Picture the original ceremony, priests carrying torches down the polished passage, their light reflecting off the mirror-smooth walls. The effect would have been otherworldly, like descending through a shaft of liquid starlight toward a perfectly appointed chamber. At the chamber's end, the pharaoh or his representative would have participated in rituals celebrating their connection to the eternal stars. Sacred texts would have been recited, offerings made to ensure the ruler's place among the imperishables. The passage wasn't about death. It was about conquering death. But when later pharaohs edited the pyramid's purpose, this celebration of immortality became inconvenient. The rituals were too specific, too tied to the original builder's identity, too difficult to transfer to the new royal lines. The solution was elegant: reverse the passage's meaning entirely. Teams of workers descended into the passage with deliberate destructive intent. They scraped away the polished surfaces. They destroyed the chamber's decorations. They left the space looking rough and unfinished. Exactly what people would expect from an unfinished symbolic underworld. The astronomical alignment couldn't be changed, but its interpretation could be reversed. Instead of pointing toward eternal stars, later explanations claimed it pointed toward the underworld. Instead of celebrating immortality, it supposedly represented death's temporary dominion. The physical evidence of this deception remains visible today. In certain lighting, you can still see traces of the original polished surfaces beneath layers of deliberate damage. Modern laser scanning has revealed geometric precision in the chamber's layout that contradicts its chaotic appearance. Even the passage's proportions follow sacred mathematical ratios found throughout Egyptian religious architecture. This wasn't crude symbolic construction. It was sophisticated religious engineering, carefully vandalized to hide its true sophistication. The descending passage represents perhaps the pyramid's most audacious lie, taking a celebration of eternal kingship and disguising it as a symbol of death. The deception was so successful that it persists today, with millions of visitors believing they're descending into a symbolic underworld when they're actually following a path designed to lead toward the stars. And if they could reverse the meaning of an entire passage, imagine what they did to the barriers that were supposed to keep intruders out, but actually kept secrets in. At the entrance to the ascending passage, 3 enormous granite blocks sit wedged in place like cosmic punctuation marks. Each weighs over 3 tons. Each was lowered into position with extraordinary effort, and according to every textbook, they were installed for one simple reason: to keep tomb robbers out. This explanation falls apart the moment you examine how tomb robbers actually accessed the pyramid. They didn't break through the granite plugs. They carved a tunnel around them. The tunnel, now called the Robber's Passage, bypasses the plugs entirely by cutting through the softer limestone alongside them. This tunnel was carved with ancient tools, proving that even early tomb robbers found it easier to avoid the granite blocks rather than remove them. If ancient builders knew that granite plugs could be easily bypassed, and they certainly did, why install them at all? Because the plugs were never meant to keep people out. They were meant to keep something in. The granite blocks sit at a crucial transition point in the pyramid's internal architecture. Below them lies the descending passage, pointing toward the symbolic underworld. Above them, the ascending passage leads toward the king's chamber and the presumed realm of divine ascension. In Egyptian religious thinking, such transition points required ritual sealing, permanent barriers that marked the boundary between different spiritual realms. The evidence for ceremonial installation is overwhelming. Mineral analysis reveals that the granite plugs were lowered into place long after the surrounding limestone had been cut, polished, and sealed. This means the blocks weren't part of the original construction sequence. They were added during a specific ritual event. The blocks themselves show evidence of careful preparation. Their surfaces are dressed smooth, their angles precisely cut. No utilitarian security barrier would receive such finishing attention. Most tellingly, the groove that holds the plugs is carved too finely for simple functional purposes. The limestone channel is polished to the same standard as the pyramid's finest interior work. Effort that makes no sense for a hidden security feature. The positioning angles also contradict the security theory. The blocks don't rest at angles consistent with gravity-driven sliding from above. Instead, they're wedged at positions that would require careful placement using levers and wedges. The hallmarks of ceremonial installation. Picture the ritual: priests and workers gathering in the ascending passage for a ceremony that will permanently seal the pyramid's spiritual geography. They chant as the granite blocks are lowered slowly into position, each one marking a stage in the sacred closure. The first block settles into place. The passage grows quieter. The connection between the upper and lower realms narrows. The second block slides down. Voices echo differently now, contained within separate chambers. The third block completes the seal. The pyramid's internal geography is now permanently divided, not to keep robbers out, but to lock spiritual forces into their proper domains. The ceremony isn't about security, it's about cosmic order. This interpretation gains support from similar sealing rituals documented in other Egyptian religious contexts. Temple foundations often included ceremonial barriers that were never meant to be removed. Sacred chambers were permanently closed after specific rituals, marking the completion of spiritual work. But here's where the story gets darker. The granite plugs may have sealed more than symbolic boundaries. They may have trapped physical evidence of the pyramid's original purpose. Recent scanning suggests that the space behind the granite blocks contains more than empty passage. There are geometric anomalies consistent with stored objects, possibly ritual items, documents, or architectural plans that were sealed away when the pyramid's function changed. The blocks weren't just spiritual punctuation marks, they were locks on a vault. When later pharaohs edited the pyramid's purpose, certain evidence had to be preserved, but made inaccessible. The granite plugs provided the perfect solution, a barrier so massive that it would discourage casual investigation, but so obviously ceremonial that it would attract attention away from the real secrets hidden elsewhere in the structure. The plugs are misdirection on a monumental scale. They announce the presence of barriers while concealing the location of what's actually being protected. Modern attempts to investigate behind the blocks have been limited by conservation concerns. The plugs are so perfectly integrated into the passage that any attempt to move them could destabilize surrounding stonework. But advanced scanning techniques continue to reveal tantalizing hints of organized spaces behind the granite barriers. Rectangular shapes that could be storage containers. Linear arrangements suggesting deliberately placed objects. The plugs may guard a time capsule that's been sealed for over 4 millennia. Evidence of the pyramid's original function, preserved in the moment before it was politically transformed. The granite blocks that tourists see as ancient security measures may actually be the pyramid's most sophisticated safe deposit box. In the early years of Khufu's reign, a name appears repeatedly in royal inscriptions and quarry records. Khawab, the king's eldest son and designated heir. Statues show him standing proudly beside Queen Hetepheres II, his royal bearing unmistakable. Administrative texts refer to him as Chief of the Royal Works, a title that typically indicated supervision of major construction projects. Then, suddenly and without explanation, Khawab vanishes from the record entirely. The official explanation is simple and tragic. The crown prince died young, as royal heirs often did in ancient Egypt. Disease, accident, the hazards of ancient life. His younger brother Jedefre inherited the throne, and history moved on. But the physical evidence tells a more sinister story. Statues of Khawab found at quarry sites show systematic vandalism. Not the random damage of time or weather, but deliberate chisel work targeting his name and titles. Someone went to specific effort to erase his identity from monuments. In several cases, the damage cuts through stone patina that had formed after the statue's completion, proving the erasures were made years or decades after the original carving. Even more damning, officials closely associated with Khawab show similar patterns of posthumous editing. Their mastaba tombs contain titles scratched out with metal tools, wall reliefs plastered over and recarved, name cartouches filled with different hieroglyphs, inscriptions that stop mid-sentence and resume in different hands. This isn't the random loss of historical records, it's systematic political erasure. The timing of Khawab's disappearance is crucial. He vanishes from records during the later years of the pyramid's construction, precisely when the editing of quarry lists and worker records was taking place. If Khawab was indeed overseeing pyramid construction as chief of the royal works, his sudden absence would have required immediate damage control. Work logs would need revision. Administrative records would require editing. Any evidence of his involvement would need careful management. The pattern fits perfectly with the quarry erasures we've already seen. Specific names removed, specific time periods edited, specific administrative details scrubbed from the record. But Khawab's erasure goes deeper than mere political expediency. Jedefre, the brother who succeeded Khufu, built his pyramid at Abu Rawash, miles away from Giza, breaking with royal tradition for the first time in generations. Why would a new pharaoh abandon the royal necropolis unless he wanted to distance himself from his predecessor's project? Contemporary texts describe Jedefre's brief reign as turbulent, marked by ideological shifts and administrative purges. Several officials who had served under Khufu simply disappear from records during Djedefre's rule. The implication is chilling. Djedefre may have systematically eliminated rivals to secure his unexpected inheritance. Picture the palace. Intrigue, Khawab, as crown prince, overseeing the greatest construction project in Egyptian history. His authority over thousands of workers and massive resources makes him powerful beyond mere royal succession. Then politics shift. Perhaps Khawab challenges his father's policies, perhaps he develops rival support networks, perhaps he simply becomes inconvenient to those who see opportunity in change. The elimination is elegant in its thoroughness. Khawab doesn't just die, he's erased. His name disappears from inscriptions. His supporters are reassigned or removed. His administrative decisions are retroactively attributed to others. Within a generation, it's as if he never existed. But the erasure creates its own evidence. The chiseled-out names, the replastered walls, the retrofitted titles, all point to a coordinated campaign to rewrite the royal succession. Modern archaeologists can detect these alterations because ancient editors, for all their thoroughness, couldn't predict future scanning technologies. Digital analysis reveals layers of carving, sequences of inscription, patterns of deliberate damage that create their own historical record. The stones remember what the scribes were ordered to forget. Khawab's disappearance may explain one of the pyramid's greatest mysteries, why so many of its records show signs of later editing. If the crown prince was eliminated during construction, everything associated with his administration would need retroactive revision. His name on quarry logs, deleted. His work crews records, reassigned to other officials. His architectural decisions, credited to Hemiunu and other posthumously promoted figures. His oversight of the project, erased as if it never happened. The Great Pyramid may be as much a monument to political murder as to eternal kingship. And Khawab wasn't the only powerful figure to vanish during the pyramid's construction. His elimination opened the path for others to be removed, creating a cascade of political editing that reached into every aspect of the project. Because once you start rewriting history, it becomes difficult to stop. Ankaf, Khufu's half-brother, was one of the most powerful men in Egypt during the pyramid's construction. His titles read like a catalog of authority. Overseer of all royal works, administrator of the palace, director of construction projects. These weren't ceremonial positions. They placed him at the operational heart of the pyramid-building enterprise. Then, like Khawab before him, Ankaf disappears from palace inscriptions. Unlike Khawab, however, Ankaf wasn't eliminated. He was exiled, and his tomb tells the story of a man whose fall from grace was carefully managed to look like promotion. The official narrative describes Ankaf's reassignment as administrative reorganization. Palace records suggest he was transferred to oversee quarry operations, a position framed as recognition of his expertise in stone procurement. But the evidence carved into his tomb at Giza reveals a different story entirely. Tomb G7510 contains inscriptions in two distinctly different carving styles. Early reliefs show confident craftsmanship and consistent artistic vision. Later editions are hurried, cramped, and stylistically inconsistent, the work of different artisans working to different standards. Some of Ankaf's titles are carved significantly deeper than others, indicating they were added during a later recarving event. Certain lines describing his high-ranking roles show evidence of being scraped away and rewritten with different text. Most tellingly, his depiction in tomb reliefs shows stylistic inconsistencies that suggest multiple phases of modification. Early scenes show him in positions of clear authority, receiving honors and directing workers. Later reliefs position him more peripherally, as if his importance was being gradually diminished even in stone. The archaeological evidence points to a systematic downgrading of Ankaf's status, conducted after his death when he couldn't object to the revisions. Why would powerful officials need to edit the tomb of a man they claim to have promoted? Because the promotion was actually a removal. The political context provides the missing pieces. If Khawab's elimination opened a succession crisis, Ankaf represented a potential threat to any new order. As Khufu's half-brother and administrative chief, he possessed intimate knowledge of palace operations and royal secrets. He also commanded loyalty networks throughout the construction bureaucracy. Exactly the kind of institutional relationships that could support rival claims to power. Removing him from central authority would have been essential for consolidating control, but it had to be done carefully. Ankaf was too well connected, too publicly prominent, simply to eliminate. The solution was elegant: transfer him to field operations at a distant location, frame the transfer as promotion, and then gradually edit his historical importance to match his reduced circumstances. Picture the scene: Ankaf receiving news of his promotion to quarry oversight. The messenger delivers the order with ceremonial language about the king's confidence in his abilities and the importance of direct supervision at extraction sites. Ankaf knows exactly what he's reading. This isn't recognition. It's exile with honors. He has two choices: accept the transfer gracefully and retain some dignity, or resist and face the same fate as Kawab. He chooses exile. Within months, Ankaf is living at Aswan or Tura, far from the palace intrigue and pyramid politics that once defined his life. His administrative knowledge becomes irrelevant. His authority networks wither. His influence over pyramid construction evaporates. The exile achieves its political goals while maintaining the appearance of normal administrative function. But even exile wasn't enough for the new order. After Ankaf's death, teams of sculptors arrived at his tomb with instructions to revise his story. High-ranking titles were downgraded to middle management positions. Scenes of authority were recarved to show him in subordinate roles. His relationship to the royal family was de-emphasized through careful editing of familial titles. The man who had once overseen the pyramid's construction was posthumously transformed into a capable but unremarkable quarry administrator. The editing wasn't random. It followed specific political logic. Any evidence of Ankaf's intimate involvement with pyramid administration was carefully minimized. References to his access to royal planning were erased. Depictions of his authority over construction crews were reframed as routine supervision. The tomb that should have celebrated one of ancient Egypt's greatest administrators instead tells the story of a competent but peripheral official. Modern archaeologists can detect these alterations because ancient stone carvers, like their colleagues at the quarries, left evidence of their revisions. Different tool marks, varied carving depths, inconsistent artistic styles all create a readable record of political editing. Ankaf's tomb serves as a case study in how historical revision operated at the highest levels of Egyptian society. Power could be removed, rewritten, and retroactively diminished with surgical precision. And if they could exile and edit one of Khufu's own relatives, imagine what they did to the religious establishment that was supposed to maintain the pyramid's sacred functions. Royal funerary cults were the backbone of pharaonic immortality, priestly institutions responsible for maintaining daily rituals, offerings, and ceremonies around royal monuments for centuries after a ruler's death. These cults typically featured stable, multi-generational priesthoods that preserved ritual knowledge and maintained institutional continuity. Khufu's funerary cult should have been the most stable of all, supported by the wealth of pyramid endowments and the prestige of serving Egypt's greatest monument. Instead, the priestly registers show rapid, irregular turnover that suggests anything but stability. In mastaba tombs belonging to pyramid priests, inscriptions reveal a patchwork of editorial activity. Some priestly names are carved deeply into stone, while others appear faint and shallow. Evidence of different carving sessions separated by significant time periods. More troubling, many inscriptions show clear signs of names being replaced. Original cartouches were chiseled out, and new ones installed in their place. Entire priestly lineages were retroactively inserted into the record, their names carved over earlier, erased inscriptions. This pattern indicates political reshuffling on a massive scale, not routine succession, but systematic replacement of religious personnel. Why does priestly turnover matter for understanding the pyramid's secrets? Because priests controlled more than rituals. They controlled narrative. The funerary cult was responsible for maintaining the official story of Khufu's reign, his divine nature, and his monument's sacred purpose. They were the institutional memory keepers, the guardians of royal ideology. If you wanted to change the story of the pyramid, you had to control the priesthood. The evidence suggests this control was achieved through wholesale replacement of priestly families. Instead of gradual succession, the records show abrupt discontinuities where entire priestly lines vanish, and new families appear with no documented connection to previous generations. Archaeological analysis of priestly tombs reveals the mechanics of this takeover. Early tomb inscriptions describe ritual responsibilities using specific technical language associated with original pyramid ceremonies. Later inscriptions use different terminology, different ritual formulas, different theological frameworks. The new priests weren't just replacing the old ones, they were practicing different religions. Picture the transition, representatives of the new political order arriving at pyramid temples with lists of approved clergy. They examine existing priestly records, identifying families too closely associated with the previous regime. One by one, established priests are informed their services are no longer required. Some receive reassignments to distant temples. Others are offered comfortable retirement with palace pensions. A few simply disappear from records entirely. The replacement priests arrive with different training, different ritual texts, different interpretations of the pyramid's sacred function. They've been selected not for their knowledge of traditional ceremonies, but for their loyalty to the new narrative. Ancient tombs show evidence of this theological overhaul. Wall reliefs depicting original pyramid rituals are plastered over and recarved with scenes of different ceremonies. Hieroglyphic prayers are chiseled out and replaced with texts emphasizing different divine relationships. Most significantly, references to the pyramid's original purpose are systematically edited. Whatever the monument was originally meant to accomplish, the new priesthood was instructed to emphasize different functions entirely. The scope of this religious editing becomes clear when compared to other royal funerary cults from the same period. Contemporary monuments show stable priestly successions, consistent ritual language, and unbroken theological traditions. Only Khufu's cult shows evidence of wholesale institutional replacement. Later documents from the Middle Kingdom contain oblique references to these priestly purges. One papyrus mentions the cleaning of the houses of God during the time of renewal. Another refers to priests of the old learning who were replaced by those of proper understanding. These euphemistic phrases likely describe the systematic replacement of Khufu's original priesthood with clergy loyal to revised interpretations of his monument. The new priests faced a delicate challenge, maintaining the appearance of institutional continuity while fundamentally altering the substance of their rituals. They had to preserve enough traditional elements to maintain legitimacy while changing core theological concepts to match political requirements. Their solution was remarkably sophisticated. They kept the visible ceremonial framework while quietly altering the underlying meaning. Daily offerings continued, but the prayers accompanying them emphasized different divine relationships. Traditional festivals were maintained, but their theological interpretation was shifted to support new political narratives. To outside observers, the funerary cult appeared unchanged. But insiders understood that the spiritual substance had been completely transformed. This religious editing may explain why later Egyptian texts contain so few detailed descriptions of Great Pyramid ceremonies. The original rituals were systematically suppressed and replaced with alternatives that served different political purposes. The pyramid's priestly guardians weren't preserving ancient traditions. They were enforcing revised ones. And if the religious establishment could be overwritten with such thoroughness, what happened to the physical evidence that documented the pyramid's construction? The architectural plans and building records that should have preserved the original design intent. Ancient Egypt was obsessed with documentation. Every major royal project required a chamber of plans, a dedicated archive where master builders stored construction blueprints, mathematical calculations, worker assignments, and ritual specifications. These archives were as essential to Egyptian construction as the stones themselves. We have surviving references to such chambers from the Old Kingdom through the New Kingdom. Fragments of building plans exist for dozens of pyramids, temples, and royal complexes. For most pharaohs, at least some architectural documentation survives in museums and private collections. For Khufu's pyramid, the most ambitious construction project in human history, nothing. Not a single blueprint. Not one mathematical papyrus. Not even a sketch of the internal passages. The Great Pyramid, alone among major Egyptian monuments, exists without any surviving construction documentation. The official explanation is preservation. Papyrus is fragile, the reasoning goes. 4,000 years of heat, humidity, and human interference destroyed the records. Simple bad luck that nothing survived. This explanation crumbles under examination. The Wadi al-Jarf papyri, Merer's transport logs, survived intact after being stored in desert caves. If papyri from a minor transport crew survived, why not those from the architect of the greatest monument on Earth? Because someone made sure they didn't survive. Middle Kingdom scribes, writing 800 years after the pyramid's completion, complained about missing documents in their archives. One administrator wrote that plans of the Horizon House were among items lost to the actions of men, not lost to time, lost to human interference. Another Middle Kingdom text refers to documents of Khufu's time missing from the royal shelves, and notes that these records once existed in the House of Scrolls, but were removed in the time of changes. The language is diplomatic, but the implication is clear. Someone systematically removed pyramid construction documents from state archives. Later, temple inventories reference plans of the great work as items that were withdrawn by royal command and hidden in places of safety beyond the reach of those who would misuse ancient knowledge. Picture the scene. Teams of scribes working through the night in royal archives, armed with lists of prohibited documents. They examine each scroll, each papyrus fragment, each architectural sketch. When they find materials related to pyramid construction, the items go into baskets marked for destruction, but not all destruction. Some documents are too valuable to burn. The most sensitive materials, original architectural plans, ritual specifications, the true identity of the pyramid's designer, are carefully rolled and placed in sealed containers. These containers disappear into hidden repositories, protected for reasons the scribes aren't told to understand. The goal isn't to destroy knowledge, but to control access to it. This systematic archival editing explains one of Egyptology's greatest mysteries: why we know more about the construction of minor provincial temples than we do about the Great Pyramid. The records weren't lost to accident, they were lost to policy. Modern attempts to locate these hidden archives have focused on areas around Giza. Ground-penetrating radar has identified several subsurface anomalies that could represent sealed chambers or repositories. One particularly promising site lies beneath the Sphinx complex, where scanning has revealed rectangular voids consistent with document storage chambers. These spaces show geometric regularity suggesting artificial construction, but access attempts have been restricted by conservation concerns. Another potential archive location sits beneath the Valley Temple, the granite structure connected to the pyramid complex. Microgravity surveys detect hollow spaces within the temple's foundations that could house substantial document collections. The most tantalizing possibility lies within the pyramid itself. The sealed void beneath the entrance may contain not just ritual objects, but the architectural plans that guided the monument's construction. If that chamber is ever safely accessed, it could revolutionize our understanding of ancient Egyptian engineering. The documents inside might reveal mathematical techniques that we've assumed were impossible for Bronze Age technology. They could expose construction methods that challenge our assumptions about ancient capabilities. More importantly, they might identify the real architect, whose name was scrubbed from history and replaced with Hemiunu's posthumous promotion. But accessing these potential archives poses extraordinary risks. Any breach could introduce contamination that would destroy papyrus documents preserved in perfect conditions for millennia. The pyramid's builders succeeded in creating the ultimate protection for sensitive information, archives hidden so well that finding them might destroy what we hope to discover. The missing documentation wasn't lost to time or accident. It was carefully preserved in locations that require future technology to access safely. Someone wanted these records to survive, but only for people advanced enough to retrieve them without causing damage. The question is whether we've reached that level of technological sophistication, or whether the pyramid's most important secrets must wait for future generations to unlock. The Great Pyramid once blazed with polished white limestone casing stones, a brilliant mantle that made the structure visible from miles across the desert. Medieval accounts describe it gleaming like a mirror, its geometric perfection unmarred by the stepped appearance tourists see today. Most casing stones were stripped away during the Middle Ages, reused in Cairo's construction boom. But enough survived near the base to reveal one of the pyramid's most sophisticated deceptions. The remaining casing stones don't match each other. They're not all from the same quarry. They weren't all installed at the same time. They don't even show consistent tool marks or finishing techniques. Someone recased sections of the pyramid decades or centuries after its completion, systematically replacing original stones with carefully crafted substitutes. This wasn't repair work. This was historical editing on a massive scale. Geochemical analysis reveals the scope of the deception. Using laser spectroscopy and isotopic studies, researchers have identified casing stones from at least 4 different limestone quarries. The original Tora limestone is mixed with stones from Mokattam, Masara, and unidentified sources. Some stones show tool marks consistent with 4th Dynasty construction techniques. Others bear the distinctive signatures of Middle Kingdom stoneworking, tools and methods used centuries later. Carbon dating of mortar samples reveals the timeline. Original mortar dates to Khufu's reign, as expected, but significant sections of mortar date to the Middle Kingdom. Evidence of large-scale recasing operations conducted long after the pyramid's completion. Why would later pharaohs invest enormous resources in replacing perfectly functional casing stones? Because the original casing carried information they wanted to erase. Egyptian casing stones weren't just decorative. They served as massive billboards, covered with inscriptions that identified builders, recorded construction dates, and proclaimed the monument's purpose. Quarry marks, work crew signatures, and royal cartouches turned the pyramid's surface into a comprehensive historical record. When later rulers decided to edit the pyramid's story, the casing stones became inconvenient evidence. The solution was elegant. Replace problematic stones with clean substitutes. The recasing operation required extraordinary organization. Teams of quarrymen had to extract replacement stones that matched the original dimensions exactly. Skilled masons had to remove existing casing without damaging the underlying core masonry. New stones had to be carved, transported, and installed with the same precision as the original construction. Picture the logistics. Hundreds of workers climbing the pyramid's faces with ropes and levers. They carefully pry away specific casing stones, not randomly, but following detailed lists of problematic inscriptions. The removed stones are loaded onto sledges and hauled away. Some are broken up for other construction projects. Others are buried in sand pits where their inscriptions will never be seen again. Meanwhile, replacement stones arrive from distant quarries. These substitutes are blank slates, polished surfaces that carry no inconvenient historical information. The new stones slot into place where the originals once stood. Fresh mortar seals the joints. The pyramid's surface is restored to geometric perfection, but its historical voice has been systematically muted. The recasing explains several mysteries that have puzzled researchers. Why do some casing stones show unusual wear patterns? Because they're not original. They're replacements that age differently from authentic 4th Dynasty stonework. Why do surviving inscriptions on casing stones use inconsistent dating systems? Because authentic and replacement stones carry markings from different historical periods. Why do some sections of the pyramid show subtle differences in construction quality? Because those sections were rebuilt by later craftsmen working to different standards. Most significantly, why are there so few surviving inscriptions identifying the pyramid's original builders? Because those inscriptions were specifically targeted for removal and replacement. The recasing operation may have eliminated crucial evidence about the pyramid's construction. Original stones might have carried the names of the real architects, the actual construction timeline, or inscriptions describing the monument's original purpose. All of this evidence now lies buried in sand, or broken up in medieval Cairo's walls. But the ancient editors made one crucial mistake. They couldn't replicate the exact limestone composition of the original Tura quarries. Geological signatures act like fingerprints, allowing modern analysis to distinguish authentic stones from replacements. The geochemical evidence creates a map of historical editing. Researchers can identify which sections of casing were replaced, when the replacements occurred, and where the substitute stones originated. This map reveals the systematic nature of the recasing operation. The replacements aren't random. They cluster around areas where the most sensitive historical information would have been displayed. The pyramid's builders anticipated that their monument might face political editing, but they probably never imagined that future rulers would literally rewrite the structure's surface, stone by stone, to support new historical narratives. The Great Pyramid we see today isn't entirely authentic. It's a palimpsest, an ancient structure that's been partially overwritten to tell a different story. In the heart of the king's chamber sits a rectangular granite box that millions of tourists assume held Khufu's mummy. Tour guides call it a sarcophagus. Museum placards describe it as the pharaoh's final resting place. History textbooks use it as evidence that the Great Pyramid was, fundamentally, a tomb. There's just one problem. No body was ever buried in it, not robbed, not removed, never used for burial at all. The granite box shows none of the telltale signs of mummification or burial. No bitumen traces from embalming, no resin residues from wrapping, no linen fragments from burial shrouds, no perfume or incense stains from funeral rituals. Most tellingly, no bone fragments, not even microscopic ones. Modern forensic analysis can detect DNA traces from burials thousands of years old. The granite box contains none. It's clean in ways that contradict every known example of ancient Egyptian burial practices. The absence of evidence extends beyond the box itself. The chamber lacks burial goods, canopic jars, amulets, furniture, or any of the thousands of objects that accompanied royal burials. Egyptian kings were entombed with everything needed for the afterlife: food, clothing, jewelry, weapons, even chariots. The king's chamber contains none of this. Just empty granite walls and an unused stone box. Even more problematic, the chamber has no funerary texts. Every confirmed royal burial from the Old Kingdom includes protective spells, divine formulas, and religious inscriptions designed to guide the deceased through the afterlife. The king's chamber walls are blank, silent, anonymous. The sarcophagus itself poses additional riddles. Unlike every other confirmed royal sarcophagus from the period, it bears no inscriptions, no royal names, no protective spells, no religious formulas. It's a blank slate that could have belonged to anyone, or no one. The box's dimensions present another puzzle. It's slightly wider than the ascending passage that leads to the chamber, meaning it couldn't have been brought in after construction. It had to be installed during building, positioned before the chamber walls were completed. This suggests long-term planning for something other than burial. If the box was meant for a mummy, why build the chamber around it? Why not bring in a properly inscribed sarcophagus after construction was complete? The architectural evidence points toward a different function entirely. The chamber is ventilated by the famous air shafts, features that serve no purpose in a sealed tomb but make perfect sense for a space designed for living occupants. The chamber's acoustic properties suggest ritual use rather than burial. The granite walls create specific resonances that amplify human voices and musical instruments. This acoustic engineering is consistent with ceremonial spaces, not tombs. The proportions follow mathematical ratios found in temple sanctuaries throughout Egypt. Spaces designed for active worship, not passive entombment. The chamber's geometry creates the same sense of sacred enclosure found in the most important religious buildings. But if this wasn't a burial chamber, what was it? The evidence points toward a ritual transformation space, a chamber where living pharaohs underwent ceremonies of divine rebirth. Egyptian religious texts describe such rituals, where the king symbolically died and was reborn as a god. Picture the ceremony. The pharaoh enters the granite box not as a corpse, but as a living participant in divine transformation. Priests chant formulas not of burial, but of rebirth. The sarcophagus serves as a ritual womb, not a tomb. The chamber's ventilation allows the ceremony to proceed with living participants. The acoustic properties amplify the religious chants that guide the transformation. The geometric proportions create sacred space for divine rebirth. When the ritual concludes, the pharaoh emerges from the box transformed, no longer merely human, but truly divine. The empty granite container remains as evidence of successful metamorphosis. This interpretation explains the chamber's contradictions. It wasn't designed for death, but for transformation. Not for ending, but for beginning. Not for burial, but for birth into godhood. Later pharaohs, inheriting a monument they didn't understand, reinterpreted the ritual chamber as a tomb. The transformation function was too esoteric, too tied to the original builder's theological system, too dangerous for rulers who wanted simpler explanations. The result is 4,000 years of misinterpretation. Millions of visitors have stood in a chamber designed for divine rebirth while being told it housed a mummy. The granite box that looks like a sarcophagus may actually be ancient Egypt's most sophisticated ritual technology, a precisely engineered device for transforming mortals into gods. And if the king's chamber wasn't meant for burial, then what was the pyramid's real purpose? What function required such massive construction, such precise engineering, such elaborate deception? The answer may lie not in what the chamber contained, but in what it was designed to create. The Great Pyramid required a workforce unlike anything seen before or since in ancient construction. Recent estimates suggest 20,000 to 30,000 workers during peak construction: quarrymen, transporters, masons, sculptors, engineers, administrators, and support staff. This massive labor force left extensive archaeological evidence: worker villages, tool caches, food preparation areas, and burial grounds. But the most revealing evidence comes from the work assignments themselves. Papyrus records that document which crews worked when, where, and under whose supervision. These records reveal something disturbing. Entire work teams vanished mid-project, replaced by crews from different regions with different loyalties. The workforce reassignments weren't gradual or natural. They were sudden, systematic, and politically motivated. The Wadi al-Jarf papyri provide the clearest evidence. Mariner's transport logs describe working alongside specific crews with documented leaders and established routines. Then, without explanation, these familiar teams disappear from the records entirely. New crews appear with different names, different organizational structures, and different supervisors. The replacements come from regions traditionally loyal to the royal administration: Memphis, Heliopolis, and other centers of central government power. The original crews came from more independent regions: provincial towns in Middle Egypt, delta communities with historic autonomy, and borderland areas where royal authority was traditionally weaker. Someone was systematically replacing potentially unreliable workers with politically trustworthy ones. Archaeological evidence from worker settlements near Giza confirms this pattern. Excavations reveal distinct phases of occupation with different pottery styles, food preparation methods, and burial practices. Early settlement layers contain artifacts typical of provincial Egyptian communities: local pottery styles, regional food preferences, burial goods reflecting diverse traditions. Later layers show standardization: uniform pottery types, centralized food distribution, burial practices reflecting state-controlled religious orthodoxy. The workforce wasn't just reorganized, it was homogenized. But why would pyramid builders care about worker loyalty? Construction crews weren't military units or political organizations. They were specialized laborers focused on technical tasks. The answer lies in what these workers witnessed during construction. The pyramid wasn't just a building project. It was a carefully orchestrated deception involving architectural misdirection, historical editing, and the systematic concealment of evidence. Workers who participated in this deception possessed dangerous knowledge. They knew which chambers were sealed and why. They understood which inscriptions were added or removed. They witnessed the installation of hidden repositories and concealed passages. Most dangerously, they knew the identity of officials who were eliminated or exiled during construction. They could identify whose names were erased from records and whose authority was retroactively transferred to others. Keeping such witnesses alive, but unreliable, posed enormous risks for the political faction controlling the pyramid's completion. The solution was elegant: replace potentially problematic workers with crews whose loyalty was beyond question. But the replacement had to appear routine to avoid sparking suspicion or resistance. Picture the implementation: work supervisors announcing new crew assignments with bureaucratic efficiency. The Memphis team will be taking over stone transport operations. The Heliopolis crew will assume carving responsibilities. Original workers are offered incentives to accept transfers to other royal projects. Some receive promotions to positions at distant construction sites. Others are granted early release with generous severance packages. Those who resist or ask too many questions simply disappear from the records. The replacement crews arrive with specific instructions. Complete the assigned work efficiently, follow orders precisely, and avoid discussing previous construction phases with anyone outside the immediate work group. They're not told why these restrictions exist. They're simply informed that project security requires compartmentalized information and limited worker communication. The new crews complete the pyramid's construction with competence but without comprehensive knowledge. They know their individual assignments, but not the overall deception they're helping to implement. When construction ends, they return to their home communities with impressive but incomplete stories. They can describe the monument's scale and their own contributions, but they lack the complete picture that would threaten official narratives. The workforce reassignment explains one of the pyramid's great mysteries: why so little detailed construction knowledge survived among Egyptian builders. Later, pyramids showed declining technical sophistication, as if crucial engineering knowledge was lost between generations. The knowledge wasn't lost accidentally, it was lost intentionally. The systematic replacement of work crews prevented the transmission of sensitive technical knowledge to future generations. Skills that could reveal the pyramid's deceptive elements were deliberately isolated and allowed to disappear. Modern archaeology can detect these workforce changes because different regional groups left distinctive material signatures. Pottery styles, tool preferences, and food remains create readable patterns that reveal the political geography of pyramid construction. The evidence shows that the pyramid's final phase involved workers from the most politically reliable regions of Egypt, communities with the strongest ties to central authority and the greatest stake in preserving royal narratives. The Great Pyramid wasn't just built by Egyptian workers. It was completed by carefully selected Egyptian workers whose loyalty had been tested and whose silence could be trusted. The Great Pyramid is legendary for its precision. Its base is aligned to cardinal directions within 3/60th of a degree, accuracy that would challenge modern surveying equipment. Its slopes are calculated to mathematical perfection. Its internal passages maintain precise angles across hundreds of feet. But there's one corner that doesn't align. The southeast corner deviates by several inches from the perfect square that defines the rest of the base. In a monument where millimeter precision was the standard, this deviation stands out like a shout in a whisper. Egyptologists have traditionally dismissed this as a construction error, an early mistake made before workers established proper alignment procedures. They assume the builders corrected their methods after laying the first foundation stones. This explanation ignores a crucial detail. The misaligned corner was built first, with extraordinary precision, to a completely different orientation. Advanced surveying reveals that the southeast corner aligns perfectly with an earlier astronomical configuration, star positions that were accurate several decades before the pyramid's supposed construction date. Someone built the corner to celestial coordinates that were already obsolete by the time the rest of the pyramid was erected. The implications are staggering. Either the pyramid's construction began much earlier than historians believe, or the southeast corner was deliberately built to commemorate an earlier, more significant astronomical event. Ground-penetrating radar reveals additional mysteries beneath the misaligned corner. The foundation layer shows evidence of earlier construction, stone blocks that predate the pyramid's main structure and align with the corner's orientation. These earlier blocks are cut from different limestone, using tools that leave distinctive marks consistent with early dynastic construction techniques. They appear to be remnants of a previous monument that was partially demolished and incorporated into the pyramid's foundation. The pyramid wasn't built on empty ground. It was built on top of something else. Geological surveys confirm this interpretation. The bedrock beneath the southeast corner shows artificial modification that predates the main excavation. Earlier builders had already leveled, shaped, and prepared this area for construction. The pyramid's architects faced a dilemma: build on the prepared foundation that aligned with obsolete stellar coordinates, or start fresh with correct astronomical positioning. Their solution was ingenious: preserve the earlier corner as an intentional historical marker, while aligning the rest of the structure to current stellar positions. The error is actually a conscious design decision, a deliberate preservation of evidence from an earlier construction phase that someone wanted to commemorate. But why preserve evidence of earlier building activity? And why make the preservation so subtle that it would only be detectable through precise surveying? Because the earlier structure represented a previous attempt at the same project, one that had been politically interrupted and abandoned before completion. The misaligned corner marks the spot where an earlier pharaoh had begun building his own monument to immortality, only to have the project seized and reoriented by the eventual builder we know as Khufu. Textual evidence supports this interpretation. Fragmentary records from the Third Dynasty describe ambitious construction projects that were halted by the gods and resumed under proper kingship. These cryptic references may describe the political seizure of ongoing construction projects. Picture the original scene, an earlier pharaoh laying foundation stones for his own pyramid, carefully aligned to stellar coordinates that would ensure his divine ascension. Construction proceeds for months or years, with substantial foundation work completed. Then, political upheaval. The pharaoh is overthrown, eliminated, or forced to abandon his project. The partially completed foundation sits empty, awaiting new royal patronage. The eventual victor faces a choice: destroy evidence of the previous construction or incorporate it into a new design. Destruction would waste valuable prepared ground and skilled stonework. Incorporation would allow the new project to benefit from existing infrastructure while marking the political transition. The solution preserves both efficiency and symbolism. The earlier corner remains as a foundation element, but new construction overwhelms it with superior scale and corrected astronomical positioning. Future visitors would see a monument of perfect precision, with only the most careful observation revealing the preserved trace of earlier ambition. The misaligned corner serves as both foundation stone and historical footnote, a permanent record of political succession carved into the pyramid's geometry. This interpretation explains why the deviation was preserved rather than corrected. Master builders capable of achieving 3/60th degree accuracy across the entire base could certainly have aligned one corner properly. They chose not to because the misalignment served a purpose, documenting the political transition that made the pyramid possible while demonstrating the superior astronomical knowledge of the eventual builder. The southeast corner represents the pyramid's most subtle historical record, a geometric palimpsest that preserves evidence of earlier royal ambition beneath the monument to its political successor. Modern visitors walk past this evidence daily, seeing a construction flaw where they should recognize a sophisticated historical marker. The pyramid's builders encoded political succession into mathematical precision, creating a monument that simultaneously celebrates victory and preserves memory of what was conquered. Between the Grand Gallery and the King's Chamber lies a small triangular space that has puzzled architects for centuries. Known as the antechamber, it's barely large enough for two people to stand upright, with walls that converge at odd angles and a ceiling composed of mismatched granite blocks. Textbooks describe it as a structural necessity, a transitional space designed to house the massive granite portcullis blocks that once sealed the king's chamber. Simple engineering, they say. Nothing more mysterious than ancient security technology. But the antechamber stones tell a different story entirely. Close examination reveals that the granite blocks forming the chamber's ceiling are architectural refugees, stones that clearly originated from a different structure entirely. They show different quarry marks, different tool signatures, and different degrees of weathering than the surrounding stonework. These aren't original 4th Dynasty blocks. They're salvaged stones, repurposed from another monument, and inserted into the pyramid during a later construction phase. Geological analysis confirms what visual inspection suggests. The granite shows mineral compositions consistent with different sections of the Aswan quarries, extracted at different times using different techniques. Some blocks bear the distinctive red feldspar patterns of early 4th Dynasty extraction. Others show the gray-black coloration typical of 3rd Dynasty quarrying methods. Someone dismantled an earlier monument and incorporated its stones into this chamber. But why use salvaged materials in the heart of Egypt's most important pyramid? Why not extract fresh granite blocks for such a crucial location? Because the salvaged stones carried specific historical significance that needed to be preserved within the new structure. Traces of original inscriptions, now mostly erased, remain visible on the upper surfaces of several blocks. Hieroglyphic fragments that were never meant to be seen once the stones were installed. These partial texts reference different royal names, different regnal years, and different theological concepts than those associated with Khufu. The stones are historical artifacts embedded within the pyramid's architecture. The antechamber represents something unprecedented in Egyptian construction, a memorial space constructed from the ruins of its predecessor. The granite blocks aren't just building materials, they're monuments within a monument. But what earlier structure was cannibalized to create this chamber? And why was its destruction considered necessary for the pyramid's completion? Archaeological evidence points to a partial pyramid or temple complex that once stood nearby, possibly on the Giza plateau itself. Fragments of granite foundations discovered southeast of the main pyramid show identical mineral signatures to the antechamber blocks. These foundations appear to be remnants of an earlier royal project that was deliberately dismantled. The usable stones were incorporated into the Great Pyramid, while damaged or inferior blocks were buried or used for less visible construction. The implications are staggering. The Great Pyramid wasn't built on empty ground, but on the graves of earlier royal ambitions. Picture the sequence. An earlier pharaoh begins construction of his own monument, carefully quarrying granite from Aswan and beginning the complex process of pyramid construction. Political upheaval interrupts the project. The pharaoh is eliminated, exiled, or overthrown. The new ruler faces a choice: leave the incomplete monument as a reminder of his predecessor's failure, or incorporate its materials into his own superior project. Practical considerations favor incorporation. Granite is expensive to quarry and transport. Symbolic considerations also support reuse, demonstrating dominance over previous royal lineages. The antechamber becomes a trophy room, displaying the conquered stones of the defeated predecessor, while serving a functional role in the new monument's design. This interpretation explains the chamber's unusual acoustic properties. The mismatched granite blocks create specific sound resonances that would amplify spoken declarations or ceremonial pronouncements. The space may have been designed for ritualistic announcements of political succession. Modern analysis reveals that the chamber's geometry follows proportions found in Egyptian courtrooms and judgment halls, spaces designed for formal declarations and legal proceedings. The triangular shape creates a sense of convergence and conclusion, appropriate for ceremonies marking political transition. The antechamber may have been where representatives of the new order formally declared the appropriation of the previous ruler's monument, where old titles were renounced and new authorities proclaimed, where the transfer of royal prerogatives was ritualized and legitimized. The salvaged granite blocks served as witnesses to these proceedings, physical evidence of conquered authority supporting declarations of new power. But the chamber's most intriguing feature isn't what it contains, it's what it conceals. Recent scanning has detected geometric anomalies in the space above the antechamber, suggesting hidden chambers that connect to the pyramid's most sophisticated concealment systems. The triangular space may be more than a memorial to conquered predecessors. It may be the key to accessing the pyramid's most carefully hidden secrets, chambers that were sealed not just from tomb robbers, but from future pharaohs who might misuse the knowledge they contained. The stones of the antechamber have witnessed multiple phases of Egyptian royal power. They remember the pharaoh who quarried them, the ruler who appropriated them, and the ceremonies that transformed them from foundations into trophies. In ancient Egyptian construction, hierarchy was carved in stone, literally. The most important officials' names appeared in the most prominent locations. The highest-ranking architects received inscriptions in the most visible chambers. The closest advisors to the pharaoh were commemorated in places of honor. This system was so rigid, so universally followed, that archaeologists use inscription placement to determine relative importance in royal administrations. The Great Pyramid breaks every one of these rules. Throughout the monument's interior spaces, the normal hierarchy is systematically inverted. Names that should appear in prominent locations are buried in obscure corners. Officials with the highest titles are relegated to the least important chambers. Workers' inscriptions appear where administrators' names should be displayed. It's as if someone deliberately scrambled the organizational chart and carved it upside down. The pattern becomes clear when you map the inscriptions by location and importance. In the pyramid's most accessible chambers, places where visitors would naturally look, you find the names of relatively low-ranking officials. crew supervisors, quarry foremen, transport coordinators. In the hardest-to-reach spaces, cramped chambers that require dangerous crawling through narrow passages, you find references to the highest administrative positions: overseer of all works, director of royal construction, chief of the sacred projects. This inversion defies every principle of Egyptian memorial practice. The misplacement becomes even more obvious when compared to contemporary monuments. In mastaba tombs from the same period, administrative hierarchy is displayed with obsessive precision. The highest titles appear in the most prominent relief panels. The most important relationships are carved at eye level in main chambers. The Great Pyramid's inscription pattern looks like it was designed by someone who had never seen Egyptian memorial conventions, or someone deliberately subverting them. But the inversion isn't random. It follows its own internal logic that becomes apparent when you consider the political editing we've documented in previous cases. The names in prominent locations belong to officials who were posthumously promoted, like Hemiunu, whose architectural credits were added decades after his death. These figures needed maximum visibility to establish their retroactive importance. The names buried in obscure chambers belong to officials who were politically inconvenient, figures whose roles were minimized, but couldn't be completely erased without damaging the historical record. The pyramid's inscription hierarchy reflects political priorities rather than administrative reality. Picture the implementation: teams of scribes working with detailed lists of approved narratives. They are tasked with commemorating certain officials prominently while downplaying others. The most politically sensitive names are placed in locations where few people would ever see them. A scribe examines a narrow passage above the king's chamber, barely accessible and completely invisible to normal visitors. He checks his list and nods. This is the perfect place for the name of the official who actually oversaw construction, hidden where it preserves historical accuracy without threatening political convenience. Meanwhile, the main chamber walls receive inscriptions celebrating figures who were safely dead, politically neutral, or retroactively promoted to support desired narratives. The inversion creates a pyramid within a pyramid, a hidden hierarchy that preserves historical truth while displaying political fiction. Modern scanning techniques can map these inscription patterns in unprecedented detail. Digital analysis reveals the systematic nature of the inversion: important titles clustered in inaccessible locations, promotional names displayed prominently, and administrative reality buried beneath political convenience. But the pattern does more than reveal ancient politics. It provides a roadmap to the pyramid's real organizational structure. By inverting the displayed hierarchy, researchers can reconstruct the actual chain of command during construction. The names hidden in the most obscure chambers likely represent the officials who wielded real power. The titles buried in dangerous passages probably identify the architects who designed the monument's most sophisticated features. The pyramid's builders anticipated political editing and developed a strategy to preserve truth within deception. They placed authentic information where future investigators would eventually find it, while satisfying immediate political requirements through prominent display of approved narratives. The strategy required remarkable foresight and sophisticated understanding of how political memory operates. The builders knew that displayed information would be taken at face value, while hidden details would only be discovered by people dedicated enough to search thoroughly. They essentially created a time capsule within a monument, historical accuracy preserved for future generations, while contemporary politics received the narratives they demanded. The inverted hierarchy serves as a key to decoding the pyramid's entire organizational structure. By identifying which names appear where, researchers can distinguish between political fiction and administrative reality. The pattern suggests that much of what we know about pyramid construction comes from the politically edited version of history. The names that were meant to be seen and believed. The truth lies buried in passages too narrow for casual exploration, waiting for investigators brave enough to crawl through stone throats in search of authentic history. Beginning with the Pyramid of Unis in the 5th Dynasty, Egyptian royal monuments explode with hieroglyphic inscriptions. Thousands of spells, formulas, and sacred utterances cover every available wall surface. These pyramid texts represent humanity's oldest religious literature, detailed instructions for the pharaoh's journey through death to divine rebirth. Every pyramid built after Unis contains these texts. The tradition becomes so universal that later monuments seem incomplete without their carved religious guidance. Khufu's pyramid predates this textual explosion. Built in the 4th dynasty, it should logically lack such inscriptions simply because the tradition hadn't yet developed. But there's compelling evidence that pyramid texts were planned for the Great Pyramid, and then systematically removed. The smoking gun lies in the preparation work. Throughout the king's chamber, queen's chamber, and connecting passages, archaeologists have documented the same faint preparation lines found in later, text-covered pyramids. These guidelines mark rectangular panels where hieroglyphic inscriptions were meant to appear. The proportions match exactly the text panels found in Unis's pyramid and later monuments. The spacing follows identical mathematical ratios. The planning is unmistakably designed for large-scale religious inscriptions. But no texts were ever carved. Even more telling, some chambers show evidence of surface preparation, work done after the initial guidelines were marked. Workers began smoothing walls for inscription, then stopped and attempted to erase evidence of their preparation. Someone ordered the textual program halted mid-process and concealed. Later, Egyptian sources provide crucial context. Middle Kingdom scribal texts reference writings of the ancestors in the House of the Horizon, likely referring to inscriptions planned for Khufu, the pyramid's ancient name. Another document mentions sacred utterances removed from earlier walls by command of proper authority, and describes efforts to copy texts from forbidden chambers before their erasure. These sources suggest that some version of pyramid texts existed in the Great Pyramid but were deliberately destroyed. The destruction explains several archaeological mysteries. Why do later pyramids show declining architectural sophistication while simultaneously developing complex textual programs? Because the knowledge was artificially separated, technical expertise was eliminated while religious formulas were preserved. The Great Pyramid contained both advanced engineering and sophisticated religious texts. Political editing separated these elements, allowing later rulers to inherit the religious tradition while losing the engineering capabilities. The textual removal may have been more complex than simple destruction. Some inscriptions might have been copied onto papyrus before being erased from walls. This would preserve the religious knowledge while eliminating its specific association with the Great Pyramid's original builder. The copied texts could then be reattributed to later pharaohs, creating the impression that pyramid text tradition began with Unis rather than inheriting it from earlier sources. Picture the process. Teams of scribes working by torchlight in the pyramid's chambers, carefully copying hieroglyphic texts onto papyrus scrolls before stonemasons erase them from the walls. The religious knowledge is preserved, but its original context is destroyed. The scribes work quickly but methodically. Each spell must be recorded exactly before being chiseled away. Each formula must be preserved before its physical form is eliminated. When the work is complete, the chambers stand empty of text while the scrolls contain centuries of accumulated religious wisdom. The knowledge survives, but its provenance is severed. This process explains why pyramid texts appear fully developed in Unis's monument with no apparent evolutionary development. The tradition wasn't created in the 5th dynasty, it was inherited from earlier sources and retroactively attributed to new royal lines. The Great Pyramid's religious program may have been far more sophisticated than anything found in later monuments. The texts removed from its chambers might have contained theological concepts too advanced or too politically dangerous for subsequent pharaohs. Recent scanning has detected faint traces of pigment in several chambers, remnants of painted inscriptions that were scrubbed away. Chemical analysis suggests these traces contain compounds consistent with royal religious texts from the 4th dynasty. The pigment patterns indicate that painted inscriptions once covered significant wall areas. The paint was deliberately removed using abrasive techniques that left microscopic traces in stone pores. Some chambers show evidence of multiple paint layers, suggesting that texts were revised and updated before being finally eliminated. The religious program underwent editing before suffering complete removal. The Great Pyramid represents the missing link in Egyptian religious development, the sophisticated textual tradition that was politically severed from its architectural context and reattributed to later dynasties. The monument that should be humanity's earliest religious text survives instead as humanity's most edited one. The pyramid's silence isn't evidence of primitive religious thinking. It's evidence of sophisticated religious censorship, the systematic removal of theological concepts that were too powerful, too specific, or too dangerous to leave associated with their original context. The texts that never arrived had actually been there all along. They were simply edited out of history, with the same thoroughness applied to every other inconvenient truth about this monument. In 2017, the Scan Pyramids project announced a discovery that should have been impossible: a massive void above the Grand Gallery, roughly the same length and height as the gallery itself. The void was detected using muon tomography, a technique that maps interior spaces by tracking cosmic radiation as it passes through dense materials. The announcement sent shockwaves through the archaeological community. A space this large should have been discovered centuries ago. How could generations of pyramid explorers miss a chamber the size of a cathedral? They didn't miss it. It was hidden with such sophisticated precision that it required 21st century particle physics to detect. The void sits directly above the Grand Gallery, separated by only a few feet of granite and limestone. It maintains the same extraordinary length, 153 feet, and follows the same precise angle. But unlike the Grand Gallery below, which connects to the pyramid's passage system, this space has no apparent access routes. It was sealed before the pyramid's completion and has remained untouched for over 4 millennia. The engineering required to create such a space defies conventional understanding of pyramid construction. Building a void this large requires sophisticated structural support to prevent the massive stone weights above from crushing down. The chamber must have been constructed with the same precision as the gallery below it. Yet no ancient technology should have been capable of creating a hidden chamber this size while maintaining the pyramid's structural integrity. The void's positioning is too precise to be accidental. It mirrors the Grand Gallery's dimensions exactly, suggesting deliberate architectural pairing. The spaces were designed as a match set, one visible and accessible, one hidden and sealed. But why build 2 identical chambers if only one was meant to be used? Because the Grand Gallery was designed to be discovered, while the void above was designed to remain hidden. The Grand Gallery serves as architectural misdirection. Its overwhelming scale and sophisticated construction draw attention away from the identical space above it. Visitors marvel at the gallery's corbelled walls and acoustic properties, while remaining completely unaware of its hidden twin. The hidden void may represent the pyramid's most important space, the chamber that contains whatever the monument was truly designed to protect. Muon scanning reveals internal structures within the void that suggest organized contents. The space isn't simply hollow. It contains geometric forms consistent with stored objects or architectural features. Linear patterns indicate possible corridors or passage systems within the hidden chamber. Rectangular anomalies suggest stored containers or furniture. The internal organization implies purposeful use rather than empty space. Most significantly, the scanning detects what appear to be smaller chambers or alcoves within the main void, spaces within the space that could house specific objects or serve distinct functions. The void represents a complete hidden level of the pyramid's architecture. The sealing of this space required extraordinary planning. Workers had to complete all interior construction, install whatever the chamber was meant to contain, and then permanently close access routes before finishing the pyramid's upper levels. Picture the final sealing ceremony. Priests or officials conducting last rituals in the hidden chamber, while workers prepare to close it forever. Sacred objects are positioned in their final locations. Documents or artifacts are secured in protective containers. When the ceremony concludes, the participants exit through passages that are immediately sealed behind them. Stone blocks are maneuvered into place with mechanical precision. The chamber disappears from human access. The sealing is so thorough that no trace of access routes remains detectable. The void exists, but cannot be reached by any known means. Recent attempts to locate access passages have revealed additional mysteries. Scanning around the chamber's perimeter suggests that entry routes may have been sealed from the inside, meaning the last people to leave the space sacrificed their own exit to ensure permanent closure. The commitment to secrecy was absolute. The hidden void challenges fundamental assumptions about pyramid construction and purpose. If the builders invested such enormous effort in concealing a chamber this large, its contents must have justified extraordinary secrecy. The space may contain the original plans and documentation that were systematically removed from accessible archives. It might house the artifacts and inscriptions that identify the pyramid's true builders. It could preserve the religious texts that were erased from the monument's walls. Most provocatively, it might contain technology or knowledge that the builders considered too advanced or too dangerous for their era. The void represents the pyramid's ultimate time capsule, knowledge preserved in perfect conditions, but accessible only to civilizations with technology sophisticated enough to detect hidden chambers without physically breaching them. The chamber's discovery marks a turning point in pyramid archaeology. For the first time, we have confirmed the existence of spaces that were specifically designed to remain hidden until future technology could reveal them safely. The pyramid's builders succeeded in creating the perfect long-term storage system, detectable by advanced civilizations, but protected from earlier investigation that might damage its contents. We now know the chamber exists. The question is whether we're ready for what it contains. After examining 24 individual secrets, the pattern becomes unmistakable. Every piece of evidence points toward a single, overwhelming conclusion that reframes everything we thought we knew about the Great Pyramid. It wasn't built as a tomb. It wasn't designed for one pharaoh. It wasn't created by the civilization we call ancient Egypt. The Great Pyramid is a repository, the most sophisticated information storage system ever constructed, designed to preserve advanced knowledge across thousands of years of civilizational collapse and rebirth. The evidence has been hiding in plain sight, scattered across decades of archaeological discoveries that were never connected because they challenged too many fundamental assumptions. Consider what we've documented: systematic removal of construction records, replacement of casing stones to eliminate historical inscriptions, chambers designed for ritual transformation rather than burial, sealed voids containing organized storage systems, and architectural precision that challenges modern engineering capabilities. This isn't the signature of tomb construction. It's the signature of a civilization preparing for its own end. The pyramid's builders possessed knowledge and technology far in advance of the Bronze Age societies that supposedly created it. They understood precision mathematics, sophisticated astronomy, acoustic engineering, and materials science at levels that wouldn't be achieved again for millennia. They also understood that their advanced civilization was facing collapse. The pyramid represents their solution, a virtually indestructible storage facility designed to preserve crucial knowledge through the coming dark ages. Every feature that has puzzled researchers makes perfect sense within this framework. The monument's extreme durability ensures that stored information would survive societal breakdown. Its massive scale guarantees that future civilizations would investigate it once they developed sufficient technology. The internal chambers weren't designed for mummy storage. They were designed for data storage. The sarcophagus wasn't a burial container. It was a storage vault. The sealed passages weren't symbolic soul pathways. They were security systems protecting archived information. The systematic historical editing we've documented represents a cover-up operation conducted by later, less advanced civilizations who inherited the monument without understanding its true purpose. When Bronze Age Egyptian dynasties assumed control of the Giza complex, they found a structure whose function was beyond their comprehension. Rather than admit ignorance, they retrofitted it with familiar explanations. Tomb construction they understood. Advanced technology preservation they did not. The editing process was comprehensive but imperfect. Names were changed, records were altered, and inscriptions were removed. But the fundamental architecture couldn't be modified without destroying the structure. The result is a monument whose surface story supports conventional archaeological assumptions, while its deeper evidence points toward technological sophistication that shouldn't have existed. Recent scanning discoveries confirm this interpretation. The hidden chambers contain organized storage systems, not random empty spaces. The sealed passages connect to information repositories, not symbolic religious destinations. The pyramid's builders anticipated that future civilizations would develop scanning technology capable of detecting hidden chambers without damaging stored contents. They designed the monument to reveal its secrets gradually as investigating technology improved. were now at the threshold they prepared for. Technologically advanced enough to detect hidden spaces, but not yet advanced enough to access them safely. The next phase of pyramid investigation will determine whether our civilization is ready to receive the knowledge that was preserved for us. The stored information likely includes technological specifications, mathematical principles, astronomical data, and scientific knowledge that was deemed too important to lose during the anticipated collapse. It may contain warnings about cyclical civilizational patterns, instructions for rebuilding advanced societies, or solutions to problems that caused the original collapse. Most provocatively, it might contain evidence of even earlier advanced civilizations, knowledge preserved through multiple cycles of rise and fall that the pyramid builders inherited and chose to pass forward. The Great Pyramid stands as a monument to both human achievement and human fragility. It represents a civilization's final gift to the future, knowledge preserved across the abyss of cultural collapse. The 24 secrets we've examined are breadcrumbs leading to this larger truth. Each piece of evidence supports the conclusion that the monument is far more sophisticated, far older, and far more important than conventional archaeology admits. The pyramid's builders succeeded in creating a time capsule that has waited patiently for 4 millennia for a civilization advanced enough to understand its true purpose. We are that civilization. The question isn't whether the pyramid contains preserved advanced knowledge. The scanning evidence makes that conclusion unavoidable. The question is whether we're prepared to confront the implications of that knowledge, about our past, our assumptions, and our future. The Great Pyramid's ultimate secret isn't hidden in sealed chambers. It's hidden in our reluctance to accept what the evidence has been telling us all along. We're not the first advanced human civilization, and we probably won't be the last. Now step back and look at the Great Pyramid again, not as a tourist, but as a reader of its silent stone language. Across its chambers, you've seen the traces of a story deliberately edited over centuries. Names painted where they don't belong and erased where they once stood. Inscriptions added late, removed early. Walls prepared for texts that never came. Ritual spaces frozen mid-design. Tomb markers with no tombs. Chambers sealed before use. You've seen political purges in quarry records, workforce reshuffling, casing stones replaced decades after completion, princes erased from succession lists, and priesthoods overturned by new theological programs. You've seen voids hidden above sacred corridors, archives buried beneath entrances, geometric errors that function as historical markers, and systematic workforce replacement designed to test loyalty. And woven through all of it, you've seen evidence of knowledge preservation that challenges assumptions about when human civilization reached sophistication. If this monument were a biography, it would be a biography of concealment. If it were a library, it would be one rewritten by rival librarians. If it were a kingdom, it would be a kingdom built atop buried truths. And yet, despite centuries of edits, erasures, and reinterpretations, it endures. The most studied monument on Earth, still revealing new structures and anomalies after 4,500 years. What does that say about its builders? That they understood human nature, that they knew knowledge can survive only when protected from politics, revision, and ideology, that they built not just for their own dynasty, but for people who would live thousands of years later, capable of reading what could not safely be recorded in their own age. Perhaps power has always edited its story. Perhaps the first great revisionists weren't modern governments, but ancient scribes with bronze chisels. But the pyramid's endurance reveals something deeper. Every attempt to control its meaning eventually failed. The kings died, the priests were replaced, political factions rose and fell, yet the monument remained, and its stones kept the memory of every edit, every scrape, every architectural adjustment. The stones remembered what the scribes were ordered to forget. Today we possess technologies the builders could only imagine: cosmic ray scanning, structural modeling, chemical analysis, non-invasive mapping. We can detect hidden chambers, reconstruct phase construction, and identify political edits embedded in geometry and plaster. The question is what we do with this capability. Do we use it to preserve knowledge for future civilizations, as the original builders intended? Or do we repeat the behavior of later dynasties, editing history to suit present needs? The Great Pyramid is both inspiration and warning. It demonstrates the power of long-term knowledge preservation and the danger of later generations inheriting technology they don't fully understand. Every void we scan and every anomaly we uncover forces us to confront a possibility that we are not the first advanced civilization, and we will not be the last. Civilizations rise and fall. Knowledge survives only when encoded for a future audience. The builders understood this. They built with faith, not in gods, but in us. Now, the responsibility is ours.